Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a build I'm calling the Best Buddy, a build that pairs with another melee character to do massive damage, both on your turn and, importantly, when it's not your turn. This build is going to have excellent skill access and tremendous amounts of damage when paired with a friend, and so since it wants to be paired with a friend, you can in some sense think of it as a support build, but it's less support in the sense of, you go pal, you're doing a great job, and more support in the sense of, don't talk about my friend that way or I'll stab you in the kidney, which I think is more Astarion style anyways. This build is going to also have excellent skill access and can fill most of the need for skills in your party, and the amount of damage that you dish out when it's not your turn is going to shut down a lot of enemy plans in the middle, preventing enemies from moving around the battlefield, doing damage, or attacking your allies. Before I begin, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to Faithful for the $10 donation, John Walker for the $20, SLD KGF for the $20, and Joey Central for the $10, as well as Zorlix for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support, and it really does mean a lot. Alright, let's get in and start building the Best Buddy. I'm using Astarion as the example character here because this is a sneak attacking rogue build, and this build in fact centers around trying to output as much sneak attack damage as often as possible and as consistently as possible. So this is a perfect fit for Astarion in my opinion, but if you're building this as a custom character, then all the normal characters, races that are really good for stealth builds are good for this one as well, of course, so things like Halfling, which gets you advantage on stealth checks and the ability to reroll ones. Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed can allow you to get next to enemies much more easily and more reliably. And Duergar, of course, is always excellent for any build that wants to be sneaking around because the free out-of-combat invisibility lets you start combat from basically any position, which is incredibly powerful. Here, though, we're just going to use Astarion, and we are going to start with a level of Rogue. This gets us an incredible set of skill access, because Rogue gets some of the best skill access in the game, as well as starting with 2 skill expertise, and also gets us Sneak Attack. Now, Sneak Attack is the core of this build's concept, and it's built around a really interesting mechanic with how Sneak Attack actually works. Sneak Attack you are probably familiar with, but it does an extra d6 of damage per odd rogue level, so 1, 3, 5, and so on, to enemies that are either adjacent to allies or threatened by allies, or that you have advantage against. It only does this once per turn, though, but the interesting thing about once per turn is that it is meaningfully different from once per round. So if we can make attacks when it's the enemy's turn, we can double up the amount of sneak attacks that we're doing. To that end, we're going to try to make a build that does a bunch of opportunity attacks so that we can attack when it's not our turn in order to apply sneak attack as frequently as possible. This way we're going to allow our allies to remain safe because we're going to be stabbing enemies even when it's the enemy's turn, killing them before they can actually do anything too harmful to us. So, starting with Rogue gets us access to sneak attack right away, as well as all the other goodies that Rogue gets. For our attribute selection, we get to go with a very greedy attribute split here because we are a rogue, and rogues are entirely single attribute dependent, or SAD, which is actually a good thing. And because they only need dexterity. In general, dexterity-based characters are the saddest characters in the game, which I will remind you is good. You want to be sad, not mad. And the reason for this is that dexterity is the best attribute in the game. So if you can base your damage off of dexterity, then you get to focus all of your points into the best attribute in the game. We don't need any other attributes to make this character function, so we're just going to take 17 dexterity, 16 constitution to maximize our HP as well, and this character will be in melee a lot, so it's useful to have relatively high HP, and then 15 wisdom because it is great for our saves, and also helps a lot with our skill access. Since this character is going to be our lockpicking and trap disarming character, having high wisdom is actually pretty good for this character because we get to have pretty reasonable perception, since we'll have proficiency in perception and high wisdom, so we can detect traps and disarm them with the same character, which is a pretty nice little bonus. We're going to take expertise in sleight of hand and stealth, and we want acrobatics, and we want perception, so Astarion comes with that from just being a high elf, but you can take that from a background or anything like that. If you want to, you could dump your wisdom a little bit here. You could drop it down to 14 and take charisma, and you could have this character have expertise in persuasion and be your dialogue skill character. But if you aren't doing that, then you can put the extra points into some other stuff, like investigation is always useful. Insight you can maybe use if you end up in dialogue. This last point won't end up going anywhere that matters too much, but you can take various skills that you think will help out your party. The most important, of course, is just having high sleight of hand and high stealth and decent perception so that this character can disarm traps and get into the position that it needs to get into. Another thing I should mention is that this character does benefit very strongly from getting Ethel's hair, so if you are building that, then you can still take 17 dexterity, drop your wisdom to 14 because we'll be skipping out on the odd numbered ASI, and then you put your extra 2 points somewhere else like intelligence. So if you're using Ethel's hair on this character, which it does benefit from, then you could take an attribute split like this. Alright, that's level 1. We don't have to make any other decisions, so let's go down to level 2. At character level 2, we're going to take a level in Fighter. And we're actually going to go a little ways into Fighter in this build, because we still want to get extra attack, even though we do want to maximize our sneak attack damage as much as possible, which means more rogue levels. We also are just a martial build, and you really want to get extra attack. Fighter also has quite a lot of synergy with this build's plan, and will let us get extra feats with fewer levels invested, so that will give us a lot of extra advantages by taking levels of Fighter. This build makes itself a very powerful combat character as a result, because we get to take at level 2 a fighting style, and that fighting style can be 2-weapon fighting, which lets us add our dexterity to our offhand attacks. So now when we're dual wielding, we get fully powered attacks with both hands. And since this character is trying to apply sneak attack very frequently and trying to attack very frequently, having fully powered offhand attacks is very powerful. Also, when you make an opportunity attack, which this build is going to be doing very frequently, if you are dual wielding, you get to attack with both weapons. So powering up our build with multiple weapons by having 2-weapon fighting active means that we're applying our dexterities to damage up to 4 times per round starting at level 2, which is a pretty impressive amount of damage. If you get that, if you get the opportunity attack at level 2 on this character, which is harder to arrange because we don't have the tools that let us do that yet as easily, but if it does happen, we will be able to add just a flat 12 damage to our attacks that turn, because we're going to be doing 2 attacks on our turn, and then 2 attacks on the enemy turn. 12 damage is more health than most enemies at level 2 have, so you're going to be able to kill a lot of goblins and various small critters just with the base damage of your weapons of your attacks before even factoring in weapon damage or what you actually roll. So that's a pretty significant boost to the character. We also get medium armor and shield proficiency. This character is mostly going to be dual wielding, but there are times when you want shields as well, and depending on what enemies you're facing, you may want to swap in a shield for a specific fight. So while we are dual wielding most of the time, it's still the shield proficiency is still valuable, and medium armor is great for all dexterity-based characters because of the medium armors in Baldur's Gate that don't cap your dexterity, so you can use one of those to have some of the highest AC totals in the game. AC will be very good for this character for a variety of reasons that I'll get into shortly. Obviously, AC is good for every character, but this character loves it in particular. Fighter level 2, we get Action Surge, letting us apply our dexterity to damage even more often, right? So we are able to do our dexterity's worth of damage 5 times per turn on Action Surge turns, starting at this level. And that's just a lot of additional damage. And then at Fighter level 3, we get to take Battle Master, which both powers up our actual attacks, because Battle Master is so powerful with the maneuvers, and gives us a bunch of additional options when we can trip enemies and crowd control them, which plays into this character's wanting to pair with another character, because if you trip a character for your melee ally, this character is always pairing with a melee ally, then that melee ally now has advantage on its attacks. So you can really help out your buddies with the Battle Master maneuvers, giving them some additional damage. For that reason, the maneuvers that we're going to select are trip attack, and we are going to select precision attack. It's just always good to have precision attack for when you really want to land an attack. And then finally, the last one that we're going to take is riposte. This character is going to be making opportunity attacks every time an ally is attacked, because we're going to take the sentinel feat. And with riposte, now you get to make retaliation attacks if they attack your ally or if they attack you and miss. So in just about every circumstance, you're going to be able to do an attack when it's not your turn, which obviously lets you very consistently apply sneak attack and very consistently add a bunch of damage. Riposte actually also adds the extra maneuver damage as well. This is one reason that we want our AC to be so high, because we want enemies to either attack our allies, because they have lower AC than us, or to attack us and miss, so that we can more reliably trigger riposte, and therefore every turn very reliably get our off-turn attacks. At level 4, we get a feat, and we're going to use this to even out our ability scores. So, of course, we are going to take an ability improvement and set our dexterity to 18 and our wisdom to 16. Incidentally, I always get people asking about this. The reason that we took the two odd numbers is that that's the highest you can get 3 attributes. In order to get this 18, 16, 16 split with a single feat, we had to take 17, 16, 15. If we could have taken 3 16s, then we would have, but you can't. And finally, we get extra attack at fighter level 5, which is extremely powerful, of course, because it's going to let us do even more damage. We are now able to make up to 6 attacks per round, since we are offhand attacking very regularly, and that's going to let us apply our damage and on-hit effects and sneak attack even more often. Of course, our sneak attack at this point is still relatively low, but we're going to fix that pretty soon. However, we do want to take one more fighter level, because at fighter level 6 we get another feat, and that extra feat can be Sentinel. This is what the build is sort of based around. Obviously, up until this point, we've mostly just been a multi-attacking dagger character, but now that we have Sentinel, and you could put this earlier in the feat progression if you really want this play pattern to come online earlier, you could try to take it at level 5, especially if you're doing Ethel's Hair to hit 18 dexterity without having to take the ability score improvement, then you could take Sentinel a little earlier and get this online earlier. But what this gives us is advantage on opportunity attacks. Notably, advantage, of course, triggers sneak attack, and it allows us to make an opportunity attack whenever an ally attacks, whenever an enemy attacks an ally. As long as we're within melee range of that enemy, then we are going to be able to make a Sentinel attack against that character. This works even if we're hidden or invisible, so you can do this while hiding, although you do have to be careful that the enemy doesn't turn around and spot you. And works extremely well if you're paired with a melee ally, and that ally can trigger attacks against themselves. One trick you can use to trigger Sentinel attacks, by the way, is to have an ally deliberately trigger an attack of opportunity from an enemy, which makes that enemy attack your ally, and then you get to attack that enemy with your own opportunity attack. So you can trigger opportunity attack chains by having an ally deliberately move into and then out of combat range. Sentinel pairs extremely well with a melee ally for this character because you can both be in melee with an enemy, and as long as the ally has lower AC than this build, the enemy is very likely to target that ally. In particular, this pairs very well with a barbarian who will be reckless attacking, and so enemies will have advantage against them. Enemies will therefore be extremely likely to target your barbarian ally, and when they do, you get to stab them in the back, or some other sensitive location of your choice. I guess that's up to you and your role-playing decisions. This is an incredibly powerful amount of damage, and lets us, as we increase our sneak attack going on into the build, apply sneak attack multiple times per round, something that that no other build without Sentinel can do reliably. So this is, even though we have slightly less sneak attack damage per attack than like a monoclass rogue, we get to use it twice as often, so it's way better. And we also get to apply the normal damage of our weapon attacks twice as often as well. Once we have Sentinel online, this character should be able to make off-turn attacks basically every single round of combat, because you are going to If they attack an ally, hit them with a sentinel attack. If they attack you, hit them with a riposte attack. And if they leave melee with you, just get a normal attack of opportunity. So you're always going to be able to attack off turn, effectively doubling the number of turns this character takes. It's like being hasted all the time, except that the haste action happens on your enemy's turn, which in a lot of ways is better because it stops them from taking actions. The other thing that Sentinel gives you is it stops enemies from moving, so if they do try to run away from you, they get paralyzed, they get stopped, not paralyzed, the condition, but paralyzed in the sense of they can't move anymore, which stops them from escaping, and allows you to hunt them down in future turns. All very powerful effects, and when it lets you trigger your sneak attack damage this much more reliably, it's extremely strong. At this next level, we're going back into Rogue, and now we get the bonus action hides, dashes, and disengages, which are extremely good, of course. This is really powerful for basically every character. Slightly worse for dual-wielding characters, because every time you use one of these abilities, it comes at the cost of an offhand attack. But the ability to get into a position to attack enemies more reliably, to evade enemies that you don't want to fight, and so on, is invaluable. Mobility is king in Dungeons & Dragons, and this character, because it's a rogue, gets some of the best mobility tools in the entire game. At character level 9, we get to take our subclass, and there's actually a couple directions you could go, but since we're a dual-wielding build, I'm going to just recommend taking Thief Rogue. Thief Rogue gets an additional bonus action attack, which is incredibly powerful, or an additional bonus action, so you can use your cunning actions and make an offhand attack, but also this just lets you make multiple offhand attacks in a round. So let's count how many attacks we're making in a round. We have 2 main hand attacks, and then we can action surge for another 2 main hand attacks. Then we get 2 offhand attacks, and then on our opponent's turn, we get 2 more attacks. So in a typical initial round of combat, this character is making 8 attacks in a turn, which is a ridiculous number of attacks. Very few characters can rival that number of attacks at this stage in the game. And even when you don't have action surge or haste or whatever, you are making 6 attacks in a typical turn, which is an incredible number of attacks, all of which are applying your damage, and 2 of those 6 attacks are also applying your sneak attack dice. Our sneak attack damage is still relatively low, but as we continue to level up in Rogue, that's going to improve. So while we got 2d6 that turn, we are at that level, we're going to continue to increase our sneak attack damage. At Rogue level 4, we get an additional feat, and we're just going to go ahead and maximize our dexterity, because we get to apply our dexterity to damage so many times per turn. We obviously want to cap that out. It's also very important to do damage more regularly. If you were using Ethel's Hair for this build, and therefore have an extra feat at this point, there's a couple options that you could take. You could take Dual Wielder, just to give you an additional armor class and the ability to dual wield non-light weapons. You still need finesse weapons to apply sneak attack with, but there's a couple like Falar Aluv, or a couple other non-light weapons that are finesse that let you that this will let you dual wield. Some other cool options are you could actually take Mage Slayer on this character to give you even more opportunities to make opportunity attacks. Now, if you're next to an enemy caster, then you can get more off-turn attacks against them, even if they aren't making attacks. I really like Mage Slayer on this character for that reason, and so for the Ethel's Hair build, I'm going to recommend that. But, of course, obviously, some of the good feats that you would take on just about every character are also good, like Alert is always powerful. Mobile is pretty good for this character as well, because it is going to increase our movement speed, and we're often moving twice per turn thanks to cunning action dashes, so increased movement speed is double value on this character. But, and of course, Savage Attacker can be used if you want to reroll your damage dice. At time of recording, it's not working correctly with sneak attack dice, but hopefully they'll fix that eventually, and it will be able to reroll your sneak attack dice. But in general, I think that this build actually really likes having Mage Slayer, and it's a feat that doesn't see a lot of use, so it's kind of fun that this character gets to use it. At Rogue level 5, we get to increase our sneak attack dice to 3d6, so while that's still not like the most incredible amount of damage that you're doing. It's pretty solid turn over turn, and it's basically the same as you would be doing with a monoclass rogue at 12 levels, because we get to apply it twice as often. A monoclass rogue ends the game with 6d6 of sneak attack damage, so this character, even with only 5 rogue levels, is doing the same sneak attack damage per round that a monoclass rogue would be doing if it's not getting the regular opportunity attacks. By applying 66 damage, but is also getting the additional reliability of Battlemaster maneuvers and the extra attack damage. You could try to build this character as a purely monoclass rogue to apply sneak attack more often, but I think the extra attack, the prevalence of extra attack, and the utility you get from Battlemaster maneuvers is just generally going to be more powerful and will make this character significantly more reliable, as well as also much more likely to trigger sentinel attacks because you get medium armor, so your AC is going to be quite a lot higher, which means that enemies are much more likely to attack your allies rather than you, and therefore trigger the sentinel attacks. And if they do attack you, then you also benefit pretty strongly from that because this version of the build has riposte. I just wanted to mention that because monoclass rogue building for this style of play is also viable, but I think this is a more reliable way to trigger the effect. We also get uncanny dodge, so if we do actually get hit, we can reduce damage by half, which is a pretty powerful effect on this character that has reasonable hit points and great AC, so we're fairly likely to not get hit that often. That means that every time we do get hit, if we can reduce the damage, that's going to make our hit points go even further, so we're going to then be quite reliable at staying alive on this character. Finally, for the last level, you don't get a lot at Rogue level 6, so we're going to go back to Fighter and get a few additional hit points, as well as increase our superiority dice and gain additional maneuvers. The maneuvers that we can take at this point, it's less important because we're going to be using these 3 primarily, but there are a couple that are really cool for us. Disarming Strike is always good. Distracting Strike is actually pretty cool for this character because you're always going to be paired with a melee ally, so Distracting Strike can help them get advantage. Menacing Attack is good. This character will be able to make good ranged attacks anyways. And when you make ranged attacks with Menacing Attack, you can completely shut down melee enemies by locking them in place with the Frightened condition, where they can't move, away from your allies. And Pushing Attack is always good, because you can push the enemy away from vulnerable allies or into your melee buddies, as well as, of course, into hazardous terrain your party might have set up, off of cliffs, into chasms, and so on. For a default selection here, I'm going to recommend taking Distracting Strike and Menacing Attack, but any of Pushing or Disarming Attack and Menacing Attack, because I think those will come up in sort of the widest variety of situations, but any combination of Disarming, Distracting, Menacing, and Pushing are all very useful, and a couple of the others can actually be pretty reasonable as well. This character is going to want to be paired with a melee ally, and so I should take a moment to talk about what characters pair best with this character. I think the best by far is a Barbarian, because Barbarians have Reckless Attack and can therefore be used to force an enemy to attack them, or at least prompt an enemy to attack them. Using Reckless Attack, you get to have an enemy more likely to attack your ally, because enemies choose their attack priority in part because of how easy it is for them to land their attacks, and doing that means with Reckless Attack means that they will have advantage and therefore be much more likely to land their attacks against that ally. Therefore, they're going to target that ally, triggering your Sentinel attack much more reliably. In addition to Barbarians, though, lots of other characters can work. Other fighters can be good. Monks are another one that works very well, because monks will typically have relatively low AC for a melee character, so protecting your monk, who's relatively vulnerable, with this character can make your monk play out quite a lot safer and add to the massive damage that character is putting out. And paladins also, because paladins will often they're relatively immobile as a class, so they'll often end up next to enemies, end their turn next to enemies, meaning that your character, your best buddy character is going to always have someone in melee to protect if you have a paladin. Overall, though, I think that barbarians make the best allies for this character, but it still really can work with just about any melee character. Actually, druids as well are really good with this character because druid wild shape forms have quite low AC and are typically attacked by enemies a lot, or beastmaster rangers similarly. That can give you a significant advantage because when those characters, normally it's a downside that your druid wild shape form or your beastmaster beast get attacked frequently, but if that happens with this character next to the enemy who's doing it, it's a huge upside for your party. For itemization for this character, you are going to go with pretty standard rogue items. You want to be dual-wielding to finesse weapons as much as possible, and the weapons are going to be just whatever increases your damage the most, gives you additional critical hit chance, and additional sneak attack dice. The Knife of the Undermountain King, of course, is always excellent for sneak attackers because it makes you more likely to critical hit, and it's just a +2 short sword, which is obviously an awesome thing to be. And there's also a couple other cool options. You're always going to want a bow on this character because you are also just a 20 dexterity character, so you can, with sneak attack, so you can make pretty solid ranged, you can add pretty solid ranged damage to your arsenal. 2-hand crossbows is pretty good as well, since we have the double offhand attack with being a thief rogue, so we can make 4 ranged attacks with this character as well, then switch back to melee, move into melee alongside an ally, and get the sentinel attacks, so you can do a hybrid ranged and melee style with this character, or a main hand bow like the Deadshot that increases your chance to critical hit. This passive works on your melee attacks as well, so having the Deadshot equipped can be very good. Another alternative, you'll also just want the best medium armor that you can find that doesn't cap your dexterity. The Armor of Agility is the usual pick here, and that's going to give you very high AC combined with your relatively high dexterity, so enemies will be much less likely to target you. If you find you're getting targeted, you can switch to a one-handed weapon and shield to get even more AC, and one-handed weapon that you could use with that, for example, is Falara Louv, which is not light, so you normally can't dual wield it, but if you're using a shield, then you might as well use it anyways. And the shriek damage, since this character attacks so often, is going to add up really, really fast on this character. Anything that adds additional damage dice is going to be really good. One special mention as well for the Stalker Gloves, which give you bonus to initiative, which obviously is always great, and increases your sneak attack damage. Normally this is worse than just increasing your attack damage, but this character sneak attacks twice as often, so this is just more reliable. And finally, if you want to do a respec in the endgame, there's a particularly cool item combo that you can use, which is take the Gloves of Dexterity, because we'll need the feat, and then use the Dancing Breeze, which is a glaive that you can get in Act 3 that is finesse. And so that means you can sneak attack with it, and you can use it with your dexterity. But it's a glaive, which allows you to take Polearm Master or Great Weapon Fighter and Sentinel, and then you can be the Sentinel Polearm Master combo, but you'll need the extra feat for that, so that's why you want the Gloves of Dexterity. If you do that, you can also respec to be 7 Rogue 5 Fighter, take Sentinel and Polearm Master with the Dancing Breeze, and then you have a character who is very powerful in its own right because it's going to be able to stop enemies from getting into melee with it. If you want more on that style of build, I did a build on Sentinel and Polearm Master and the combo already, so you can go check that out. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the best buddy character, the ultimate companion for any melee character. Just really helps out your melee characters, your melee party members, by threatening enemies, shutting them down, and doing off-turn damage, which is a really cool, unique effect that most characters don't get. The amount of off-turn damage that this character outputs is astonishing, and is going to shut down enemies very frequently, as well as, of course, being a totally reasonable Battlemaster fighter in its own right. If you've enjoyed the video, of course, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm. And you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.